Looking for a fun way to win up to 25 times your money this football season? Test your skills on Prize Picks, the most exciting way to play daily fantasy sports. Just select 2 or more players, pick more or less on their projection for a wide variety of statistics, and place your entry. It's as easy as that. If you have the skills, you can turn $10 into $250 with just a few taps. Easy gameplay, quick withdrawals, and an enormous selection of players and stat options are what make Prize Picks the #1 daily fantasy sports app. Ready to test your skills? Join the Prize Picks community of more than 7 million football fans who have already signed up. Right now, Prize Picks will match your first deposit up to $100. Just visit prizepicks.com/get100 and use code GET100. That's code GET100 at prizepicks.com/get100 for a first deposit match up to $100. Prize Picks, daily fantasy sports made easy.
You are listening to the Hiking Radio Network, where we talk the walk with shows by hikers, about hikers, for everybody.
I'm wondering if you'd go wandering with me through the wilderness and woods, where the winds are blowing free, through the darkness of the night.
Welcome to the Jester Section Hiker Podcast, where we talk about the continual pursuit of the section hiker.
And I'll spread the word, and you beat the drum. We'll round up the troops and get the gang to come, and we'll leave the streets and these neighborhoods, head over the river and through the woods.
Welcome back to Jester Section Hiker, the premier podcast with the spotlight on section hikers. I'm your host, Julie Jester Gayhart, and this is the podcast where you will hear stories about everyday people who, in addition to their everyday lives, make the commitment to hike long-distance trails where every section is a new beginning. I am really excited to not only introduce you to my guest on the podcast today, but he will be the guest for the next 3 episodes. I am having the first mini-series of the podcast. When I first talked to this gentleman, I decided I had to have him on the show, but the more he and I talked, the more we both decided he had a lot to share about his section hiking journey of the Eastern Continental Trail and beyond. From March 29th, 2017 to March 29th, 2020, my guest hiked 5,000 plus miles, 17 states, 22 degrees of latitude, 9 long trails, and a few hundred miles of country roads to connect them all. He completed the main section of the International Appalachian Trail, the Appalachian Trail, Benton MacKaye Trail, Pinhoti Trail, Alabama Roadwalk, the Florida Trail, and the Key West Everglades Roadwalk, also known as the Overseas Heritage Trail, to complete the Eastern Continental Trail. In addition to the trails that make up the ECT, he also completed the Bartram Trail, Foothills Trail, and the Palmetto Trail. He is extremely thankful for all the trail organizations, maintainers, volunteers, hiking organizations, and trail angels that made this possible. Welcome everyone to part 1 of the Why, the Way, and the Will with section hiker Will Dukes, aka Tickbait. Welcome to the podcast, Will.
Good morning. Thanks for having me. We've been in touch for the last few months over the last 1,000 miles or so of my journey, and it's great to finally sit down and talk to you.
You know what, Will, when you and I first decided to record, we were going to only do 1 episode. And the more you and I talked, you know, like I said in my intro, it was just like, wow, let's turn this into a mini series. So I'm excited. I'm excited you're on here.
Yeah, me too.
I'm excited for the listeners to find out. In this part 1, we're going to call The Why, which is basically why you decided to take on this journey and learn a little bit about who you are, why you started this, some of your obstacles along the way, and why this turned into the Eastern Continental Trail. So before we get way too deep into this, I guess we need to explain exactly who you are, Will. So tell us a little bit about yourself, who you are, and maybe who you were before you started this journey back in March of 2017?
Well, I am just a regular guy from small town South Carolina. I am from a little town called Walhalla in the northwestern corner of South Carolina. And before I got into this insane adventure, I would call myself mildly outdoorsy. I did a lot of day hikes and some car camping and things like that. I always enjoyed getting out in the outdoors, but I'd never done really any backpacking. I got a wild hair in college and almost decided to hike the AT, but it never happened. And you move into life and you get a career and you settle down and it becomes difficult and inconvenient to do anything like this. So in 2017, I was going through a career change and a relationship change, and I saw that I had the opportunity for the first time in my life, and maybe who knows, for the last time, to do some major hiking. And I decided to set out. And originally, my idea was to hike the Appalachian Trail. And over the course of 3 years, it evolved and changed, and I ended up doing a lot more.
One of the things, Will, that totally intrigued me when you and I talked for the first time is you wanted to have continuous footsteps, is what I'll call it, from your front door. So even though you wanted to complete the Appalachian Trail, I think we kind of need to start there. Is you actually left out your front door there in Walhalla, South Carolina, and began making your way toward, I guess, the Appalachian Trail. So talk to us about, not only did you have a career change, you had a relationship change, you also wanted to do something unique with that, because most people get driven to either the northern terminus or the southern terminus of the AT and they start their journey. So that right there is very unique. So talk to us about that.
Well, so I found myself wanting to hike the Appalachian Trail, but you're right. There was something inside me that was really resistant to following a single path the whole way, that somebody else set out, and that a bunch of other people would be hiking at the same time. And it was kind of I always wanted to have a continuous line of footsteps. That was important to me, but it wasn't always important to me to follow the exact route that somebody else sort of set out. And I got to tell you, my main aversion to the trail was probably the idea of going in the no-bow bubble. I did not want to go into the no-bow bubble. It was the idea. I've always been a very private hiker. I like to get out where there aren't people around. And so the idea of several hundred or upwards of 1,000 people walking together on the trail was really, it was kind of off-putting to me. So I happen to live in the upstate of South Carolina in the tip-top northwestern corner, and I live near a bunch of trails here. Well, it turns out over the entire eastern United States, there's a network of trails that are all interconnecting. And in my corner of the country, I've just been calling it the Southern Appalachian Trail Network. I don't know if there's an official name for it, but that's what it is. It's this spider web network of trails that are interconnected. And so I started to get the idea that I could use my home as my own personal southern terminus of the trail, avoid the bubble, and do my own kind of thing.
I absolutely 100% love that. I mean, there is no shuttling, getting in the car, figuring out this and that if you walk out your front door. I mean, It makes sense. Yeah.
It was kind of fun, the idea. And it turns out that my front door is as far away. So the trail network that I live near connects the Palmetto Trail to the Foothills Trail, to the Chattooga River Trail, to the Bartram Trail, and that connects to the AT. And it turns out that my front door by that route is about 2 miles farther from Chioa Bald near the NOC than Springer is. So it was almost identical to the amount of miles that I would be walking if I started at Springer.
Well, I think that is amazing. And I love that you started off that way. And we are going to get into that as we get into the mini series episodes. I'm calling them part 1, part 2, part 3. But I think what we need to do first is give people some information about the Eastern Continental Trail itself. So Will, where is it and what is the Eastern Continental Trail?
So the Eastern Continental Trail is I call it a route. It's not really an official trail in and of itself, but it includes the International Appalachian Trail, the Appalachian Trail, 70 miles of the Benton McKay Trail, the Pinhoti Trail, an Alabama road walk to connect to the Blackwater connector of the Foothills Trail, the Florida Trail, and another road walk to connect to the Overseas Heritage Trail and to Key West. So altogether, that route from the Canada border where I started to Key West is 4,200 miles. Now the trail does continue up into Canada, and some people who hike it continue way up into Newfoundland and continue up. But for me, it became important to do, as far as the country goes. I was kind of inspired by the PCT and the CDT, how they go from Mexico to Canada. And I wanted to kind of replicate that experience on the East Coast.
Well, Will, I'm going to come up with a name for you because honestly, I don't know any trail after, you and I have spoke several times that you don't know about. And even though we're going to talk or you haven't had, your footprint on, so to speak, which is great. So you go out your front door, you decide you're going to take on this trek, and there's various things that ebb and flow about this trip. So now that we know the trails that make up this trip and we know the mileage, roughly 4,200 miles, the official trails of the ECT, and we're going to get into some other trails that you hiked as well. So basically what you set out to do in March of 2017, on your birthday, by the way, is really not what ended up happening. And we're going to get into this over the 3 episodes. I think you had one thing in your mind, and then it turned into this Eastern Continental trek, and then it turned into finishing some other trails. And along the way, we're going to get the listeners to know a little bit more about who you are. You endured several things: foot issues, physical limits, mental challenges. And you actually, that first year, went home, had to take care of some things. That second year, went home and had to take care of some things, and finally finished everything up in that third year. So let's kind of break this down. So that first attempt, I'm going to call this, what was it originally, and what were the issues, and when you went home?
Well, the interesting thing about this journey was that it evolved in this really organic way and became something much bigger. And as life goes, it was messy and full of roadblocks and obstacles, and it didn't work out like I wanted it to work out, and it became, a big thing. But at the end of the day, I have completed this giant line of footprints. But it started out as I think a trip from my hometown to Katahdin, and at that time I was really overweight. I was about 306 pounds when I started, and my pack.
Oh wow! I don't know if I realized that, Will. Wow.
Yeah, I was a big dude, and I had,
because if you guys could see Will now, I mean, I'm looking at a slim, trim, good-looking dude here, so that's hard for me to believe. Yes.
Well, it was I was out of shape. I was in a place in my life where I hadn't done a lot of physical stuff, and so I was a big guy, and I had a big pack. So my pack was upwards of especially at the beginning, was upwards of 50 pounds. And so when I set out from my hometown to walk to Katahdin, needless to say, it took a long time. So I followed those trails and made it to the AT. And when I got to the Smokies, I took the Benton MacKaye Trail through the Smokies instead of the AT. Wound up at Davenport Gap and kept marching forward, and realized that I just was not going to make it to Katahdin by October. And I think it was June, and it had taken me from March 29th to get there, because I was doing, it was hard work. I was doing these 10-mile days. It wasn't quite June. I think it was May, but it was apparent that I wasn't going to make it. And that's when I decided to flip. And the flip is where the decision came in to go ahead and start working towards the Eastern Continental Trail.
And then the flip. So where did you flip to?
So the idea came to flip, and I talked to my dad a lot about this. I had been going back and forth with him about how cool it would be to walk the Eastern Continental Trail. And he had read this book called 10 Million Steps by this great, amazing guy named Nimble Will Nomad. He lives down at the southern terminus of the Pinhoti Trail now. A really inspirational guy. And, I tossed it back and forth with Dad, and, he decided maybe I should give it a go. I had an opportunity. Why not just do the whole thing? So between getting off the trail in Irwin, Tennessee, Spivey Gap, just south of Irwin, and flipping, I decided to go to the Canada border instead, and go south from there. And it was going to be an American section of the Eastern Continental Trail through Attempt. And that's how it started.
All right, perfect. So before I ask you the next question, so here we are. I just want to set the stage for everybody. You leave the house, you hike these connector trails. Here you are on your way. You take the Benton MacKaye Trail. You get to, the AT. You take the Benton MacKaye Trail through the Smokies. You're a big guy. You're doing about 10 miles a day. You get to a certain point, Irwin, Tennessee. You say, I've got to flip. So you do the flip, and your dad talks to you about Nimble Will Nomad. And you say, hey, yes, I think it's time to take on what's called the Eastern Continental Trail. So now walk us through, here you are in the American portion of the International Appalachian Trail, and you're going to start hiking south. And I know you had some experiences on the IAT leading into Maine and getting to Katahdin. So walk us through, and this is still in the same year, that's correct?
That's right. This is all 2017.
Okay, so walk us through what's going on.
So I decided to flip. I went to Maine, and I actually went up there with my dad. We were going to hike the trail together. So we drove up there, and we dropped off resupply boxes at lots of hostels, and made our way up to Bangor, and caught a bus to this little tiny town in Maine called Fort Fairfield. And Fort Fairfield is near Caribou, Maine. It's right on the New Brunswick border. If you look at it on the map, it's way up there, right on the border. And so we started south from there on the International Appalachian Trail, headed to Baxter. And the trail follows the actual border for 15 miles, which is a really interesting hike. It's not well maintained. It's full of bogs and briars and mud and mess. And we started working our way down, and he ended up having some knee trouble, which ended up sending him home, unfortunately. So we got to the next town. His knee was messed up and swollen and rough, and he went ahead and headed home, which probably worked out better, because the terrain in Maine following that was some of the most difficult stuff I've ever seen in my life. I mean, it was insane and ridiculous. But over the next couple of weeks, I made my way down to Baxter State Park, and entered a whole new world of terrain that I had never, ever, ever imagined experiencing.
Okay, so walk us through, because I think this is vitally important as we go through this mini series. So you're coming down south on the American portion of the IAT. You are now entering Baxter State Park. And, for those of us that have been to Katahdin or Baxter State Park for that matter, it's probably some of the hardest hiking that most people have ever done. And it is shocking and surprising when you get up there. You're like, whoa, what is happening here with these semi tractor trailer sized boulders? But so walk us through that, how that change started to happen with terrain, your mental capability, and, getting up and over Katahdin and all that stuff.
Well, so the International Appalachian Trail, the official entrance into Baxter is at the old East Gate. And it's possible, if you're going NOBO, to exit the park at that point. It is not possible to enter the park at that point legally because there's no gate there anymore. So going south, I had to make a bit of a change. So I'm coming south on the International AT. It's a lot of it is this beautiful snowmobile trails next to these winding rivers. And then there's about a 70-mile road walk, which sounds really intimidating to people who haven't done a lot of road walking, but it's really not that bad. It's just, a few days of walking on the road. But the terrain is this gently rolling grassland in this really beautiful potato country. I ended up staying with some Amish people who invited me in, and it was kind of idyllic and picturesque and just sort of nice. But when I got to
Listen, you have painted a perfect picture, because I swear, as soon as you said potato country and staying with some Amish, I'm like, oh my gosh, nice rolling roads, farms, breeze going by. And so
it was
beautiful.
It was not strenuous at all, but in the distance, I could see Katahdin, and I could see it coming. And I'm coming from, the north, basically from due east of Katahdin, northeast of Katahdin, and I could see it coming in the distance. And I knew it was going to be tough because at that point, the mountains are spread out and round and low, and they're a lot different than the Smokies or the Whites. But you could see this beast of a mountain coming up in the distance. And I knew that it was going to be a struggle. I had no idea what kind of struggle it was going to be. But so since I couldn't enter at the East Gate, I decided to take an alternate route and entered at the North Gate of Baxter. And from the moment I stepped off that gravel road, I think it was blacktop, but it was gravel road for a while, and then stepped off that entrance road in Baxter and stepped onto trail, I was in a completely different world. I was in a world of hiking in Maine. I mean, there's virtually no soil on the mountains. There's maybe a few inches held down by spruce and fir trees. And underneath that is bare rock. And I was planning on making about 15 miles a day, and that was not going to work. So I was confronted for the first time in my life, because I had done most of my prep hiking in the South. I was confronted for the first time in my life with what hiking in New England is really like. Bare rock slabs, wet, flat slabs that are pitched like the side of like a roof. Like you're walking, Like
I'm laughing, but it's real, people. What he is saying is like a pitched roof is a perfect way to say it.
It's like a sidewalk, but it's pitched like a roof. I mean, there's flat slab of rock that'll go up, and then it ends in a mud pit, and some roots, and then you got another one. So it's just repeating this one after the other. And that's when I first got my real challenge of falling down a lot and skinning my knees. And there's one part in particular, I remember how on earth could the trail be going up this way? But the northern parts of Baxter are very true to wilderness. They are not they do not maintain the trails more than they have to. They do blaze them pretty well, but they don't clear the trails out. It's just wilderness. So you're going through parts. There were parts of the trail that were blazed up a creek. There were parts of the trails that were, they were big fords through deep creeks and stuff. And it was a different world. But I came down through there with my giant pack, and I didn't have the luxury that so many Nobos have, or even Sobos have, of stashing their pack at the ranger station. But I had to summit Katahdin with my 50-pound pack, and it happened to be raining that day.
Oh no! Do you know did you go up over the Knife's Edge to get to Katahdin? How did you get to Katahdin?
So I came down from the northern gate at Baxter, and I followed a network of trails that led me to, I believe it was Davis Pond. So I followed Wasatacook Stream up into Davis Pond and approached the Baxter Peak, Katahdin, from the north. So I came over the saddle and then up to the top of Katahdin. The Knife's Edge goes over the east side and out the east gate. And that's normally how the International Appalachian Trail, the route that you would take. If you were gonna follow that, you would go that way. But since there was no legal entrance, I did this alternate route, which was, and in retrospect, I'm pretty glad that I did. I don't think I could have done the Knife's Edge at that point, especially the day that I came up over Katahdin. It was 40-mile-an-hour winds and raining, and that's not a good day to do the Knife's Edge with a 40-pound pack. So I went.
I don't know if there's ever a good day to do the Knife's Edge. I mean, I'm really not kidding. Like when I saw the Knife's Edge, I was like, no, that.
I want to do it one day, but I'd love to do it one day, but I was not in a place where I could do it. But
yeah,
coming up to the summit of Baxter Peak of Katahdin, I realized then, what I had gotten myself into. This is a different world. And I remember coming down Hunt. I had never experienced anything like that in my life.
And the Hunt Trail is the Appalachian Trail. So just so everybody knows, you've made it to, Katahdin, where everybody wants to be who hikes the Appalachian Trail, or, who tags all the peaks in Baxter State Park. And then you're coming down the Hunt Trail. And I actually think going down the Hunt Trail is harder than going up the Hunt Trail. So here you go again, Will, taking the hardest route to get somewhere.
Let me tell you, I thought that I knew it was going to be hard, but nobody telling you that it's going to be hard can prepare you. So, I can't see 30 feet in front of me. The rain is battering me at 40 miles an hour sideways. It's July the 3rd, I think, and it's cold and I'm soaked. And then I'm coming down this trail that I had no idea about. And it was honestly a little terrifying. I was making my way down this boulder scramble, and you realize this, you don't have this on Southern trails very often, but you realize if I make a mistake, I'm in trouble. I'm in real trouble. Every step was very important. It's very important to execute each step. So I felt my heart racing and my anxiety building coming down that mountain. And I realized that, all right, this is insanely tough, but I'm going to make it through. I'm going to go slow. And if I have to camp on the side of this mountain, I've got the equipment to survive and be okay. I'm just going to be slow and steady. So that's exactly what I did. There were times where I had to take my backpack off and lower it by rope, especially over that section of rebar. I'm sure people who've done the AT will know that little section, and make it down. But what I didn't realize is that I had left my headlamp with the Amish folks on accident.
Oh no!
Yeah. So luckily, I made it down the rock scramble before it got completely dark. And luckily I had a tiny little backup light. This is why I'm not an ultralight person, but I had a tiny backup light and I was able to make it to camp. and do it. But that was my introduction to Maine, and it was a doozy. But after I did that, I did feel empowered. I felt like I could do this. After I'd done what I think is probably the hardest peak on the trail, I felt like I could do it.
Well, that right there, like I am just like, it's hard to get me quiet on this podcast, but I mean, I literally have a visual of you coming down this hunt trail and then realizing you don't have your headlamp. And, what you said though is, you're going to take it one step at a time. And that in and of itself is amazing to calm your anxiety and stuff down enough to be able to get yourself to do that. So I commend you for that. So to kind of end out this first part, which we're calling part 1, walk us through where you went from there and where things kind of ended and you ended up going home.
So from there, I kept going south on the AT. I met up with some really cool folks, some Sobos who had started, and most of them ended up, beating my pace. They kept going, but I met some cool folks.
Let me interrupt you real quick, Will.
Sure.
At this point, you still have the bigger pack, but did you weigh yourself, or are you beginning to lose weight at this point? Are you physically starting to feel better in shape? Talk to us real quick about that.
So yeah, at this point I was starting to lose some weight. I hadn't weighed myself in a long time, and I'm not sure where. I probably weighed myself maybe at the Notch Hostel, probably at some of the hostels along the way. I'm sure I weighed myself, and I was definitely losing some weight. And I felt strong, even though, I was slow. It was just slow carrying all that weight, my body and the pack, but I felt strong. Like I can do 1 mile an hour for 10 hours up these steep rocky mountains every day, and I can do it. I felt capable, but still pretty slow.
All right, so you hooked up with some Sobo hikers, and you guys are heading south. And the Notch is in New Hampshire,
right
outside the Kinsman's or Mount Moosilauke. I can't remember. So we know you made it that far. Yeah. So walk us through what's happening.
So I ended up making it to Connecticut. That was where I had to stop. And I had to stop for stress fractures, but making it through, all of southern Maine, all of New Hampshire, Vermont, it was an experience. And slowly I'm building up my strength. I'm building up my capability. I'm feeling stronger and stronger. And you get over the whites, and suddenly it seems a lot more doable.
Yeah, you get over the whites and you feel like you can just run all the way back to
just about. I felt I was really discouraged when I got over Moosilauke, because I got over Mount Moosilauke going south, and I was saying, all right, it's over. The hard part's over. And then the next couple mountains were pretty darn hard. But after you get to Hanover, going south, there's not a portion on the trail that is as difficult or challenging. And I was going to mention some of that in the mental challenges part, but I kept moving on, and I started hitting some 20-mile days in Vermont, and I got really into a really good rhythm. At this point, I was definitely losing a good bit of weight, and I pushed it a bit too hard. I tried, at this point, I probably had 800 or 900 miles under my belt. And between the hiking in the south and the hiking up north. So I decided to do my own personal 24-hour challenge. I started in Tyringham, Massachusetts, and ended up in, where was it? Salisbury, Connecticut. And I pushed for 24 hours. I did I think it was like 42 miles.
Oh, wow.
And then my foot started hurting. And I had made it down to Kent, Connecticut, and my foot was hurting every step. My foot was like, ow, ow, ow. And I had this kind of thing before. I had a terrible toenail situation in Maine where I walked for 400 miles where every step was ow, 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 and finally got that taken care of. But this was different. This was like a bone pain. And, the old saying goes, if you're injured, you walk it off. Well, you can't walk off something that you walked on. So it felt, there was a little part of the top of my foot that was swollen, and it turns, I never got the diagnosis confirmed, but I'm almost certain it was stress fractures in my foot. So I found myself at the Connecticut-New York border, probably needing to call it for that section and go heal and work.
So this brings us to an excellent point where I think we'll wind down part one and give the listeners a little bit of something to think about before next Saturday when part two comes out. So you had foot issues. You said something that resonated, and I don't want to forget it. You said you can't walk off something that you walked on. And so we know you had foot issues. We know you had physical limits. You talked about, you were a bigger guy, which is unbelievable to me. Again, by looking at you on the screen here, the listeners can't see you, but unbelievable that you even accomplished what you did in this first leg of your journey. Let's talk to and kind of end with some of the mental challenges that you went through over this. And then knowing the mental challenge, okay, I've done this to my foot. I've got to go home.
Yeah. Well, that was hard. That was really hard. Giving up on a through attempt was hard. It was so hard. But this first section of the hike was really where I forged my mental resolve to keep going. It was southern Maine where it was really where I faced the biggest mental challenges. It's tough because that terrain is just brutal. And there's especially a 230-ish mile section between Mount Moosilauke and the Bigelows that is just relentless. Every day you're getting up every day and knowing that you've got a day full of wet rock slab to go up was very, very challenging. So knowing that you would probably reskin your knee at some point that day, you would probably fall down, and that you would be walking up up and down these impossibly steep mountains. It was really tough. And the big mental turning point for me was Old Speck Mountain and Mahoosic Notch. So for people who don't know, coming south you're coming towards the New Hampshire border at that point, and the terrain is brutal. And I remember I got to the summit of Old Speck and I climbed that tower and I could see mountains as far as I could see. And I looked back at those brutal mountains that I had just come over. You could see Baldpate and up that direction. And I looked forward and I could see Mount Washington in the distance. And that thing looked scary. And the peak was in the clouds. And it kind of a gulp scenario where you're just like, wow. But I remembered that I made it over Katahdin, and I remembered that I made it over all of those other peaks, and I knew I could do it. But coming down into Mahoosic Notch, it was raining, and it was so hard. I zeroed at the bottom to wait for the rain to pass, and I got into Mahoosic, and what they don't tell you, they tell you that Mahoosic Notch is the hardest mile. What they don't tell you is that the mile on either side of Mahoosic Notch are probably the second and third hardest miles. So, I had gone through.
Yeah, I think coming down south the way you came, it's known as the Arm.
The Mahoosic Arm is it's really tough. And then coming up the next mountain, which I think is Fulling Mill Mountain or maybe Goose Eye, I'm not sure. One of those is really tough too. But I entered the notch on a day after a bunch of rain. All of the rocks were wet. I'm a big guy. I've got a giant pack. I'm crawling under these rocks and crawling over these rocks. And there was a point where I couldn't get over this one rock. I couldn't do it. So I had to take my pack off. I tied my bear line to my pack. I threw the bear line over the rock. I climbed up the boulder and I barely made it. And I got on the other side and I'm pulling my giant pack up and it snags.
Oh,
and I can't get my pack up. So I'm so frustrated and so frustrated. And I realize that I'm going to have to crawl back over that rock, resituate my pack, crawl back over the rock and pull my pack up. And luckily a kind Nobo passed me and handed me my pack. And I was really thankful and relieved.
the trail provides, Will. The trail provides when you need it.
Well, I got my pack on, and then over the next boulder, immediately skinned my knee for what felt like the 100th time that week. And, reskinning a knee after skinning it 100 times is just one of the worst experiences. And I got even really just scared of taking next steps sometimes because that happens so often with those wet rocks. So that was just the breaking point, just about. I felt like screaming. I was at a point where that's where I thought, this is not for me. I'm quitting. I had almost decided to quit. And it ended up taking me 5 full hours to get through the notch. And then it took me 3 more hours to get up to, I think it's called Full Goose Shelter, which is that next shelter going south. And I was fighting back tears. It was just, I was fighting back the urge to ugly cry because I was battered, I was bruised, I was wet, I was chafed, I was exhausted. And it was just the hardest physical thing and the hardest mental thing I've ever had to do. But I realized at the top of that next mountain that was the hardest mile on the AT. That was it. And then I had come over Katahdin, and then I had come over the Bigelows, and then I'd come over Old Spec and down Mahoosuc Arm, and I've done all these iconic climbs. Even at my weight and my capability, I had dragged myself over every step of all that hard terrain, and that I could do the rest. And after that day, I never wanted to quit again. There wasn't a challenge on the trail that felt like I couldn't overcome. And I was able to push through it, thankfully. But that was the big turning point mentally, was that hardest moment. And making it through there really, really hardened my resolve to get through.
And that story right there, Will, is the reason this is a mini series, because right there, I was literally right there with you, and 5 hours in the Mahoosuc Notch. Yeah. I can't imagine. Yeah. And that mental challenge right there. And right now, this is literally set the stage for the listeners as to why you have more to say. So what I want to do, you've talked about your pack a lot. So let's end this first part with Will has set the mental stage. He has struggled through Mahoosuc Notch, almost quit, but that ended up being the key component that got you through to carry on, even though you had to get off the trail in Connecticut. It didn't stop you. We know there's 2 more years of this. So talk to us real quick about that pack.
My pack kind of changed over the course of my hike. It was always heavy, but I got it down to, a lot of your listeners are going to laugh at this, but at the end of my hike, I got my base weight down to 32. So I was pretty okay, happy.
Will.
Right.
I think it's great because this whole thing, you are hiking your own hike, and that's what it's about.
Well, I now that I've done this whole thing, I've been looking into ultralight stuff, and I'm really excited about my summer pack out this year, because I think I'm down to about 20 total pack weight, and that's going to let me do a lot of local trails really quickly. But through this 5,000 miles, there was not a time, unless I was out of food and water, there was never a time I really carried less than 40 pounds. And through this part of Maine, I was carrying upwards of 50. So my pack, I went through 4 packs. I counted them up before this. Over the course of this hike, I went through 4 packs. They were all big. I went through 2 Gregory's. I forget which one, but they had a tiny little thin strap that would keep breaking. So I went through those. And then the pack I finally settled on is kind of an army tank of a pack. It's a Deuter. I don't even know the model. It's a 60 plus 10, I think, a giant pack. But that thing will put up with just about anything you can put it through. And that's what I love about that one, because if you're going to carry a lot of weight, you need a durable pack. And that one got me.
How tall are you, Will?
I'm 6 foot even.
6 foot. Okay. So 6 foot, 306 pounds. And we're going to find out maybe in the next episode or the next one. He's still 6 foot, but Will, don't tell us how much you weigh now, because you're certainly not 306 pounds. Yeah. So you had 4 packs, ended up with a Deuter, like your sleeping bag and your tent.
So my tent, I went through 4 tents over the course of the 5,000 miles. And, you really only get about 1,000 miles out of these things. So when you're doing a lot, I mean, you can make them last longer, but it sounds like a lot, but when you're using something every day, I think all in all, it took me 18 months to do all of this hiking. And that's every day, getting in and out of things, rubbing against rocks and stuff, they get broken. So it sounds like an awful lot, but I went through 4 tents. I went through a Passage 1, an REI Passage 1, a Copper Spur 1, a Fly Creek, and a Copper Spur UL2. That's the tent that I have now. And I used that one for the last 2,500 miles of the hike. So, and I only had one sleeping bag. I used the Mountain Hardwear Pinole 20. I don't know if it's even in production anymore, but you might be interested to know I did not carry a sleeping bag at all on the lower 800 miles of the walk in Florida. So I only carried that for the northern part.
Okay, that's interesting. All right, see, more to talk about as we go through this. I think we're at a great point. So you guys know who Will is. We know what went down this first year. We know he left off in Connecticut, and you guys are just going to have to come back next Saturday to hear part 2 and where Will picked up in Connecticut, and we will go from there. So now I think it's a good point in the podcast where Will is going to sign off for us for now by reading his own journal entry, statement, or quote that will inspire us to keep hiking section by section.
So I did not keep a journal, unfortunately. I did keep some notes, but I want to share with you today a quote that my mom sent to me when I was in the middle of either the Whites or somewhere in southern Maine. And my folks, my mom and dad, were a huge source of emotional support through this, because it was a struggle. Getting through this was a real struggle, and it was tough. But this is something that was sent to me. My mom sent to me. It's a quote from Theodore Roosevelt. And the quote is about hunting, but it applies. I think you'll see that it applies to hikers as well. So the quote is, "For the hunter is the joy of the horse well ridden, the rifle well held. For him the long days of toil and hardship resolutely endured and crowned at the end of the day with triumph. In after years there shall come forever to his mind the memory of endless prairies shimmering in the bright sun, of vast snow-clad wastes lying desolate under gray skies, of the melancholy marshes, of the rush of mighty rivers, of the breath of evergreen forests in summer, of the crooning of ice-armored pines at the touch of the winds of winter, of cataracts roaring between hoary mountain masses, of all the immeasurable sights and sounds of the wilderness, of its immensity and mystery, and of the silences that brood in its still depths." It's especially the first part of that quote that really, really resonated with me, which was hardship resolutely endured. And, I was reminded pretty regularly to resolutely endure. And because it was hard, it was really tough. And coming through Maine like that was really hard. And so if there's one thing that I learned from all of it, it was about resolute endurance. And I really love that quote. And it also applies to the Eastern Continental Trail really well. All of those quotes about wilderness and rivers and stuff. And it rings true for the hiker as well. So.
Listen, everybody, Will's got a big smile on his face. I've got a big smile on my face. Thank you, Will, for sharing part 1 of your journey, and we will be back next Saturday for part 2.
All right. Thanks a lot.
I knew this was going to be a change for the podcast to add a mini series, but wow. I am so glad I decided to do this with Will as my first mini series guest. From his front doorsteps in Walhalla, South Carolina, with a goal of continuous footsteps, Will has so far led us on the first leg of his journey. What we know up to this point is why Will is doing this, who Will is, and his relentless determination. We leave part 1 with Will having to go home due to stress fractures in his foot, but we know his hardest day on this entire journey is behind him, and he moves forward to pursue his new goal of the ECT completion and ending his journey, linking those continuous footsteps back home to Walhalla, South Carolina. I look forward to continuing to share Will's journey with you next week in part 2 of the why, the way, and the will. Until then, thanks for listening, everybody, and as always, happy section hiking.
I'm wondering if you'd go wandering with me through the wilderness and woods to where the winds are blowing free, through the darkness of the night, heading toward the morning light. I wonder if you'd wander with me, and I'll spread the word and you beat the drum. We'll round up the troops and get the gang to come, and we'll leave the streets and these neighborhoods, head over the river and through the woods. You're wondering if I go wandering with you, what kind of trouble we'll get ourselves into. Would it be wrong to tag along with a band of vagabonds? You wonder if I'd wander with you. So I'll spread the word and you beat the drum. We'll round up the troops and get the gang to come, and we'll leave the streets and these neighborhoods, head over the river. I'm wondering if you'd come wandering my way, if you ever get lost or if the trail leads you astray. The music of the pack can always bring you back. I wonder, can we wander away? And I'll spread the word and you beat the drum. We'll round up the troops and get the gang to come, and we'll leave the streets and these neighborhoods, head over the river and through the woods.
Looking for a fun way to win up to 25 times your money this football season? Test your skills on Prize Picks, the most exciting way to play daily fantasy sports. Just select 2 or more players, pick more or less on their projection for a wide variety of statistics, and place your entry. It's as easy as that. If you have the skills, you can turn $10 into $250 with just a few taps. Easy gameplay, quick withdrawals, and an enormous selection of players and stat options are what make Prize Picks the #1 daily fantasy sports app. Ready to test your skills? Join the Prize Picks community of more than 7 million football fans who have already signed up. Right now, Prize Picks will match your first deposit up to $100. Just visit prizepicks.com/get100 and use code GET100. That's code GET100 at prizepicks.com/get100 for a first deposit match up to $100. Prize Picks, daily fantasy sports made easy.